This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. The maze is life. We're not going to get out of it. I know I'm telling you to avoid it. What I want you to do is see your way through it. There's no direct line from where we are to where we're going. The journey has twists, turns, throws obstacles in our way, but at each intersection, we become more attuned to our surroundings and the unexpected opportunities that rise with each step. You don't have to navigate the path alone. There are other people just like you, just like my guest today, staring down blank walls and wondering which direction to take. This podcast is a space for shared experiences because sometimes the story you hear may echo your own. My guest today is Simon Lee. I met Simon through podmatch.com, and I am so grateful for that because if it hadn't been for podmatch.com, I wouldn't know people like Simon. And there is something in Simon's story that resonates with me. So, Simon, take us on your journey.
Hi, Karen. Thank you for having me. Lovely introduction there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um, well, let me go straight back to my childhood. So it was extremely difficult. Um, I had to watch the abuse of my sister for 11 years, which affected me deeply, as you could imagine. I felt guilty and shamed all my life for not being able to protect her up until, I was a young man. Because despite the fact I was just a young boy, I still felt incredible shame. And part of that shame was also that I didn't get such bad treatment from my stepfather as well. He certainly didn't like me and was still cruel, but the abuse wasn't so potent as it was against my sister. And that made me feel ashamed actually, because if I could have taken on the abuse myself, it would have made me far less ashamed. But the whole masculinity issue within the family was very, very poor. So we also had an abusive uncle, we had an abusive grandfather, and it's amazing how you get a collection of dark minds that find each other, and then they become this ferocious force in a group that any kind of negative behavior in a group is always magnified when they find each other. And that's what happened with us in our childhood. But for me, it was a masterclass in how weak people that can't do the right thing then turn on other people around them. And I believe that's reminiscent of a family, a nation, or a society that happens. So coming out of that childhood, I was deeply traumatized. But in those days, no one knew what trauma really was. No one really spoke about it. So I was wandering around wondering why I was so frightened of everything. I had to manage every single aspect of my life. And if I heard two people arguing in the street or just talking loudly, I automatically took that to be a violent confrontation, and my whole body would go into fight or flight. So I was constant reaction to the stimulus around me in a very negative manner, and that was something that lasted for a very, very long time until I eventually had a breakdown, massive breakdown, when I was about 20 years old, that lasted 3 to 5 years actually. And coming out of that, I had to face it. I had to face the past because up till that point, I was running away from it. I just didn't want to face it. I felt I didn't have the strength, didn't know how. So I used my life to run from it, turn my back on it. And eventually I had to face it. And that's what the breakdown did.
You know, it's interesting because we assume when we are born that we're going to be born into this loving family.
Mm,
Mom and dad want us. Um, they're going to do everything to protect us. And in a lot of families, that's absolutely true. And we don't see what's happening on the other side of the door. And I'm assuming you grew up 50 years ago. And if we look back in time, there were certain things that men assumed they had the right to do.
Mm.
They were the authoritarians. They created the rules. Um, and a lot of women just took steps back if their husband, you know, was cruel. What was it like for your mother? Was your mother, did she see what was going on? Did she acknowledge it, or was she also afraid?
That's a really good question. In fact, you're the first person to ask this question.
Huh.
No one's gone to that area before, and it's really important because the story begins before I was born. So my mother was abused by her father, and her father used to beat up her mother in front of her. My mother spoke to me openly about this. She said she remembers hiding under the bed, covering her ears, as her father would batter her mother into submission. And she remembers her mother serving food with blood pouring down her face at the dinner table. So from 12 years old, my mother was running home from school, desperate to make sure her mother was okay. So
Oh my God.
she grew up in immense fear. And of course, my father, who I stopped seeing when I was 9, he just decided that it was too much hassle. He grew up in an orphanage in Ireland. So my mother met my father, and they both had this huge trauma inside them. So it was never going to work. But she was incredibly brave. She always fought our corner, and sometimes physically she would fight our corner. And she did eventually leave this man when I was about 14, I believe. But she was never a passive bystander. Even when her uncle, who was also a wife beater, would beat his wife, she'd stand in between them. So she was incredibly brave, but she held her own trauma. And she also didn't really know how to overcome that. And she did her best to protect us, but sometimes it just wasn't possible. With that amount of damaged men in the family, it just wasn't possible. And I don't hold any grudge against her for that. I love my mother. But even when we left, my mother took us, and when we finally left, we all thought we'd have a fresh start. That's what you think, Karen. We think, oh, I'll leave and we've got to have a fresh start. But we took all those hidden scars and psychological damage with us
Yes,
into everywhere we went, into relationships, to friendships, to work. It just went with us. So although we removed ourselves from the environment was still inside of us, and
exactly.
we didn't recognize that, and it followed us everywhere we went, and it dictated my life for many years until eventually I collapsed.
It's interesting because I remember saying this when I was a young kid, and I did not live in an abusive home. But if I got into trouble for something and I was punished, okay, I would say, I want to run away. And one day my father had just had enough of me saying it. And he said, okay, I'm going to help you pack your bags. He said, but I want you to know that you're taking me with you. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not taking you with me. He said, yes, you are, because I'm part of you. Now, do you want to talk about why you want to run away from home? And I was very grateful because if he hadn't done that, whatever that incident was that made me want to run away, probably would have stuck inside of me for a long time.
Mm,
And when we had the conversation, he said, you did something wrong. Do you know why you did it? And, I remember just crying my eyes out. No, and I don't want to make you unhappy. He said, well, the first thing is don't leave home because that'll make me unhappy. Number two, we're going to think about what you did wrong and how you could have done it right. And that I knew I was grateful to have him in my life.
mm.
However, I now look back and as I've talked to friends, have found out that they were living nightmares similar to yours because we didn't talk about it back then. So when you went and had this I'm going to call it a young man breakdown, because luckily you didn't wait until your 50s or later to confront this. How did you start to heal?
Yeah, another good question. Well, what happened leading up to the breakdown was I needed to protect myself from ever being hurt again. So I couldn't date anybody. It was far too risky. So I hit the sport of bodybuilding. and I won a Southern England bodybuilding title at 19. And I remember standing on stage with the winner's trophy, thinking, it hasn't worked. I'm still absolutely terrified. And the realization of that was just crushing to me. And afterwards, I went into this deepest depression. I just ran. I ran for miles and miles every day, and I could feel my body giving up, but I just didn't know how to suppress the pain. And eventually, I collapsed. I was diagnosed with leukemia at first, which they got wrong. So they left me with that diagnosis for 2 weeks. And that's when I thought, actually, is how I feel worth dying for? Is that pain and suffering I've got inside me worth dying for? And I decided that it wasn't. So when I got the diagnosis of acute glandular fever with ME, chronic fatigue syndrome, with some white blood cell issues I had as well, but it wasn't anything like leukemia, I thought to myself, I would rather not be here than live as I am. So I'm going to find out how to get rid of this. And I was really fortunate because I met my first mentor, Peter Hudson. Now, in the UK at this time, we're going back decades ago because I'm not a young man. So Peter Hudson was the naturopath to the rock stars. So he was very, very close with Paul McCartney's late wife, Linda McCartney. And he used to see people from bands like The Who. And so he was very, very prolific in his work. And for some reason, he took me on. And there was a most powerful moment for me was when he said to me, I was talking to him again one night about my childhood, and he said, listen, you have got to stop complaining. You've got to stop whining about your past. You are sitting on the most incredible potential because of it. But if you keep staying in the past, you're never going to access that treasure. And it was just mind blowing. I have to say, at first I was a young man, I was really angry with him. And I left, got in the car. I was absolutely fuming. And halfway back home, I had to pull over. I was so angry. But the reason I was so angry is because I knew he was right. I was running. So Peter embarked me on a really serious program of meditation, Qigong, which I still do, the beautiful art, the Chinese self-healing art of Qigong. But a little bit of dialogue along the way, a lot about soul searching. But most of it came from stillness at first to ask that question. And it was during that meditation I found out that what I was really ashamed of and guilty, and that was that I didn't have the same abuse as my sister. And it was only through meditating and breath work and Qigong that came up. But I learned so much from Peter about food, about movement, about breathing. He taught me about philosophy, religion, and I'm incredibly grateful. He's no longer with us, but I mean, he left me with an incredible foundation to start the journey with. But yes, a lot of it, it's funny, it didn't come from therapeutic dialogue, much of it. It came from stillness. Because there was one point where I was meditating for 4 to 5 hours a day, and I just disappeared into this world of consciousness. It was just wonderful, and I've never stopped doing that. I can't do 4 or 5 hours a day anymore, but it's still stuck with me how profoundly healing that was. And it just popped up and said, what you're really ashamed of is the fact that you didn't get it as bad as your sister. It just popped up through stillness. And that was a really powerful moment for me.
Have you ever been able to talk to your sister about this?
Yeah, we're really close. I mean, she left the family home quite young, and she just disappeared for a while, I think into London. We didn't really know what she was doing. There was a period where she wasn't around much, and we kind of separated for a while, but we're very close now. I think when you go through something like that, you are very close. So we speak about it quite openly. But she's really struggled. But credit to her, she's one of the most beautifully compassionate people I know. And I thought, how inspiring is my sister to go through that and not be full of hate and resentment. I think that's wonderful. And she doesn't understand how incredible that is, because it would be so easy to be eaten up with resentment and rage and contempt for what happened, and feeling so the unfairness of the situation. But she just did her own work, and she's just so compassionate and kind, which I think is wonderful. I really do.
And we all get through our traumas differently. And that's part of the reason I created Avoid the Maze, because we really don't want to we want to try to avoid those situations if we can. In your situation, you were children, you couldn't avoid it. You had to suffer through it. You had to power through it to some degree. But some people just, when that separation comes, like when you split from your stepfather and we're now with your mother, some people would say, okay, I'm better, and throw that all in the closet and just
Mm,
leave it there. Others are going to carry it with them. I'm one of those people, I carry things with me. However, I agree with you that sometimes talking about it isn't the most important thing. It's about just being in the here and now and finding
mm,
what makes you feel grounded and good. Um, Again, I grew up in a home that was very loving, not abusive, but as a child, I believed certain things were abusive. And so I carried those things with me for a long time. You know, if my father says something in this voice, I'm going to get angry. Um, and I didn't realize it until almost like you, where through a meditation, it was like, that was just his voice. There
mm.
was no reason to get angry. So over the years, you got the help you needed. How are you helping others? Because I know you are. You're taking your experiences and reaching out. So how do you do that?
Okay, yeah. So from where we just left off, I obviously became a coach. I don't think I chose to be one. Well, I did, but it just kind of landed in my lap from my experience, and it kind of felt natural to do that. So I started a lot of work with children, which is always challenging, and uh, and then later on men and women. But recently, it's gone on to more young men, still young boys, and men in general, because I think men don't tend to talk about their problems very much. And they're also now highly confused about what a man is. So what I've done is I've taken the stuff that I learned from Peter, the philosophy and the Eastern philosophy, a lot of the warrior philosophies, and I've applied that into coaching men. So I teach them how to move, how to train, the breath work, the food they should eat, and how that affects their lives. Because there's got to be a certain degree of mastery over the senses, otherwise they just master you. So I very much injected even parts of religion. I've injected into the without calling it that into the process because a lot of men are searching. They're like seekers. They're on the warrior's quest, and a lot of the religion points to that. And even self-discipline, it's the search for something. When a man wants to get himself together and get rid of his addictions and stop watching whatever he's watching and smoking and consuming, there's an inner quest there. There's a message saying, you're worth more than this. This is not who you are. So we really look at self-discipline a lot, which I love the original interpretation of discipline, which is to learn. So self-discipline is to learn of the self. And that makes it a completely different journey, a completely different pathway. So a lot of the young guys, when they come to me, they love the philosophy. I mean, their eyes literally light up when we go through like the Bushido. And it's at first I have to break a lot of the current trends that are happening. So there's kind of what we've got. We've got one side where men are really kind of suppressed and silent and just emasculated and just being silent. And then we got this huge other swing of the pendulum where guys are power at all costs and this fake alpha male and, several women on the go and all this stuff that's out there on the internet. But actually, what I say to guys, it's more the middle path in the middle of that pendulum, like Taoism. It's the middle path where the masculinity is. The man that can feel fully. He can still protect, but he can feel the injustice of the world. He can grieve. He can show grief, but it doesn't stop him taking action. So there's a lot of things going on here when people come to me. There's the rejection of a lot of stuff that they're being taught, which I think is very harmful, especially to young men. But there's also being proud of your masculinity and understanding there is a voice for it in the world and how if you can portray your masculinity in a healthy way, you're more likely to respect women, you'll protect children. And I say to these guys, you're a king and a healer. You're a king unto yourself. And by giving an example to the world around you, you can heal it because you're an example and a guiding example to those around you. And this has been exceptionally rewarding for younger guys, even down to their teens, because they're not really getting any guidance anymore of how they should behave, how they should act. And I think if any connection now, they're moving into gangs or stuff online, they're looking for something that resonates. But unfortunately, what they often get is only one part of the story, and a lot of it can be negative. So what I've done is trying to balance it out and inject a healthy masculinity back into young men. And I have to say that they love it. They really do. They found a way, they've given them a voice, but they can protect their society and be a guiding example for the others around them.
Well, and we're living in a very complex society right now. When I was growing up, I didn't think of it as a global society. My society was my neighborhood and maybe a little bit beyond that. But now kids are growing up and the whole world, the whole universe is their society. And they're
Mm,
listening to voices that are telling them who they should be, how they should be it. And yet, I hate to say this, but the parents, most of us bringing up kids, um, we're working, we're busy. We don't realize what our kids are missing and what we're missing along the way. Um, my oldest son one day said to me, Mom, it was okay that you worked outside the house, but I came home and let myself in the door when I was 11 years old. And I was all by myself
mm,
for 3 hours.
it's a
And
long
I thought I
time.
was being the greatest mom doing that because my mom did it to me. And
Mm,
I felt I had a sense of freedom. And not that he was mad at me about it, but it was like, I just wish it had been different. And I said, I wish I had known how you felt. Now, I don't know if I could have done anything any different because I had to work, but understanding it, being able to communicate. And I think that's the biggest problem. We don't communicate.
yeah, absolutely. There's the healing right there, isn't there? Being able to chat about it and
Yeah.
explain it and come to terms with it. If the conversation's shut down, it's really difficult to come through that because so many of the guys I speak to, their mums and dads just won't talk to them about the past and things that went wrong, things they did wrong, or certain tragedies that happened within the family. They're not allowed to speak about it. So, of course, it just grows like an incubator within them. It's just like a pressure cooker. So, what you just said, the ability to communicate and talk these things through is huge because there's an understanding then behind it. The fact that, as you say, you had to work, this is the way it was, you had to do that. And there's so many children that once you have these conversations, and a lot of the time I've had to be the instigator for these, where I say, well, your mother was keeping a roof over your head, she was putting food on the table. These are the things she did because she loved you. And they go, oh, yeah, but it's such a shame they can't have these conversations. Yeah, that openness is everything. It's just, it's the key.
And I feel very lucky because my youngest son um, always felt like I was, and he called me the helicopter mom. And I would laugh about it because I didn't see myself that way. And now he tells me I really wasn't, now that he's a young gentleman. Um, but he now can come back and say, thank you for those conversations. I know I didn't want to hear them when we had them, but they were really good because
That's
now
great.
I know how to do things a little bit better. And even at the age of 34, if he's doing something, he doesn't think it's coming out right, he'll call and say, is that the way you do it? And my comment always is now, what's the way you want to do it?
Mm,
Because my way may not be the right way. And um, we've really learned how to communicate, but it's an art, and we aren't taught that. in school, in churches. We just assume everybody knows how to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I've made a habit now when my because I was a late starter, so I've got a daughter. She's 16, but I've got two boys, and they're 8 and 10.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, when they come home from school, I make a point now of saying, "What did you learn today?" And we make sure we always sit around the dinner table and eat together whenever possible, and we chat and we talk about what they've learned. And at the moment, they're very open. If something happens at school, they come back and say, "Daddy or Mummy, look what happened today. This is what happened." They're very verbal, and we chat about it, and it's just great. But I always say to the fathers out there, take an interest in your boys because disconnection happens through lack of communication. So that's the beginning of disconnection. The amount of boys I've met that have been bullied for a year to 2 years and their mum and dad don't know. Now that's a problem. And some of this bullying is severe, or they've started self-harming and they've kept it all secret. These are disconnection signs. But if you just, it doesn't have to be the conversation of, did you get bullied today? Was there a problem? It can be, what did you learn today? And what was the best part of your day? You can start with that before you lead up to anything else. And they're just great conversation starters. And
Well,
it just keeps that connection there, which is so important.
and so many of us used to start the conversation with, you know, what did you do today? Which was huge. And
Mm,
I remember when my parents would say that to me, I'd say, went to school and closed it because I didn't know what they wanted to know. And I knew there were certain things I did in school that maybe I didn't want them to know.
mm,
Um, and so it took me a long time to understand the language and start off with, what did you learn today? Because maybe he only wanted to talk about a math problem and that would be fine because that was conversation. And
mm,
I could see the twinkle in his eye. Or he would say, something about maybe a science class that he didn't like and be like, oh, so what was it, that you didn't like? And then he could be very verbal. But it took me a long time. And that's one of the reasons I started coaching because I want parents to understand that, we're going to make mistakes, but we can learn through our kids. And
oh,
our
yeah.
kids need us desperately. So, how do clients find you? Because obviously, the work you're doing um, can be done anywhere, and a lot of us need it.
Yes, I'm at unlimitedcourage.com. There's quite a lot of information on there. There's some courses and people can reach out and people often get in touch just to tell me their story, which I always love to hear people's stories, especially after my own. So some people have overcome the most incredible situations, just awe-inspiring. It's amazing what you can do when you give yourself some meaning and purpose through the pain that you've been through. It's just incredible. So yes, it's an honor and a pleasure to do what I do. It really is.
And we get to learn from each other, and we
We do.
find those little tidbits. And like I said, many times during this podcast, no, I didn't grow up in an abusive relationship, but there were little things that I believed were abusive. And I carried those with me and some resentments. As much as I loved my parents, there were times that I would look at each of them and think, why are you so mean to me? And I had to then take a step back and say, are they? And if I feel that way, why? Luckily, I was able to discuss with both my parents as a young adult, and I learned a lot. But
That's
we're not
great.
always that lucky. I'm glad you were able to discuss things with your mom as well, because I'm sure she knew what was going on, but she couldn't do anything about it until she broke away. And
Mm, yeah.
that was a great step for her. Simon, you are wonderful. Thank you for all you do. I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad we could get together on this podcast. And let's stay in touch because I'm sure there are more
Definitely.
stories out there that can help many others.
I'd like that. Thank you, Carol.
You have a great day. Bye bye
You
now.
too. Bye bye.